The medicalization of children is a really huge phenomenon that is kind of so taken for granted nowadays that it's functionally invisible to us. We basically just think that it's part of reality rather than something that can be questioned and challenged. What is the medicalization of children? Well, it shows up in a number of ways. One is in the really staggering degree of mental health diagnosis of children. So one of the statistics that I looked at said that an estimated 1 in 3 teenagers alone are diagnosed with a mental health condition. And some statistics indicate that closer to half of all children qualify for a mental health diagnosis. So those are enormous numbers. And when I hear that kind of thing, it sounds like a choice our society has made. We have made a choice to characterize children's behavior and emotions in medical terms. But even when formal diagnosis isn't present, you still see medicalization happen where things still get characterized in that way and basically attributed to biology, right? So I remember like a lot of this, it's like, kids are told that the reason they're disorganized is due to brain development. It's like, it's their prefrontal cortex. And I remember experiencing that kind of thing and always feeling like it was actually really creepy and really disturbing. It's like, you don't know why I'm disorganized, right? You don't know the pressures that are acting on me in my life. So while it seems scientific, it's first and foremost an ideology that's being imposed on people, young people, who don't have the ability to consent to it. And if they do reject it, or if they attempt to reject it, then that often gets medicalized, right? So it's like rebelliousness, or what's perceived as rebelliousness, but it's really just children asserting their own boundaries. That often gets medicalized too. So it's sort of like a trap that kids can't escape. And it's really so often just in the kind of assumptions that people make around children in general in our culture, right? So it's like if you're in a family environment, and a child has a very strong emotional reaction to what's going on, that often gets attributed to the child's biology. And this kind of dynamic can create like so much panic and anger in the child that it's really hard to fathom. So the point is, even beyond formal diagnosis, the vast spread of this medicalization phenomenon is something that has come to characterize children and their lives in a pretty comprehensive way. So domains beyond the mental health system, like families, for example, are no longer safe havens for children from this ideology that destroys self-esteem and self-trust. The dehumanization of it can really be all-encompassing for many kids. So I think it's worth pointing out here that the medicalization of children's mental health is a practice, but it's also very much an ideology. It's a really influential and significant ideology in our culture. Now, before I go any further, I just want to offer a quick disclaimer here and say that this video is not professional advice of any kind, and it is especially not mental health advice. I am not a mental health professional. And also, nothing here should be interpreted as me discouraging anyone from seeking mental health treatment. And it's also important to emphasize that many people do like their diagnosis and they do like these services. And so I'm not at all attempting to invalidate that. I'm just talking about what I think are some very important dynamics here that have been neglected. Now, if my experience is any guide, I think that the way that this medicalization phenomenon of children affects us long term, it's really like we are brainwashed, essentially, right? Not in like the formal technical sense, but we're brainwashed in the sense that we start to believe that the problems in our life are not due to our real problems that we're actually facing. They are due to some like narrative about our biology, a narrative that, at least for many of us, much of the time, is not based in fact. It's not based in science. Again, it's an ideology. It's based on people's interpretation. And I think it's that dynamic where we get led to believe that our real problems in our life are something very different than what they actually are. It's that dynamic that I think is really incredibly crazy. Now, I think it is just important to note here that these diagnoses are not happening with blood tests, brain scans, things like that. They're happening with like behavioral checklists and these very subjective assessments. And so I would say that it's not fundamentally different to how we used to say that homosexuality was a mental illness. I mean, that was literally in the DSM until the mid 70s. It's like, oh, your sexuality doesn't fit what the authorities say it should. Well, you have a mental illness. You don't like the school system. You have maybe ADHD, right? You don't like how you're being treated in your family system and you have strong emotional reactions to that. You have mood swings. But I think a lot of what it really comes down to is the fact that the people who are managing children in their environments very often just want to kind of maintain things the way that they are, right? They're not really inquiring into the nature of a family system, the nature of a school system, seeking how things can evolve. And certainly, I mean, in a family, there's so much more agency that somebody has, and there's really, the need for responsibility there is more pressing. In the school system, a lot of people's hands are tied, even if they are very aware of what's going on, which much of the time they are not. And so because the adult's denial has so much inertia, we basically just, say that kids have a brain disorder for their very normal, very ordered, very sane reactions to environments that are broken and dysfunctional. And obviously that kind of medicalization is very crippling, right? It totally destroys your ability to actually address the real problems in your life. It is extremely destructive. And then when that naturally leads to very bad outcomes in your life, then the people who have been making sense of the situation in this way, who have been medicalizing you, then will say things like, oh, well, they've had a lot of risk factors, right? And so it's like they just continue they have the power to continue to characterize the situation in a way that really does not serve us. So medicalization, or at least the phenomenon that I'm pointing to with regard to medicalization, is fundamentally a way to deny the deeper truth, right? The deeper emotional truth that's going on with people, the deeper interpersonal truth, not necessarily in a deliberate, conscious way, but in a very unconscious way, yet often very predictable. Now, what does demedicalization look like here? I think it fundamentally means seeking the truth, right? Engaging in more critical thinking, exploring different ways of understanding what might be going on. And it also means removing the blocks within ourselves to doing that, right? Why are we so rigid and locked down? Why are we not so willing to look at these things that are difficult, that are painful? Why do we not have the capability for that? It means exploring the deeper emotional truth and social realities that may be driving the situation, and then elevating those to their appropriate place. Not just attributing things to individual biology or individual psychology without really, really good justification for doing so. So something that I think is really helpful here is to kind of look at the deeper human dimension of these things. So I remember my experience when I was younger, and there was a lot of experience over the course of the years of encountering many different people who were very much inclined to kind of medicalizing me and medicalizing, other kids' behavior in general. And there were real patterns now that I saw looking back on it. These people that were, really drank the Kool-Aid, really kind of went along with this sort of thing, and were very willing to attribute kids' behavior and emotions to biology. They had a particular way of showing up, right? There were clear patterns there. They had a particular energy to them, right? They were often, quite arrogant, quite frankly, right? They didn't have a lot of emotional depth. They seemed to be escaping their own difficult feelings inside of them. And I think it really makes a lot of sense that this is the psychological soil from which the medicalization of children grows. It's very often people that are very rigid and controlling and disembodied and not good at connecting with you, who really buy into this and really are very much willing to kind of use this ideology. And so I think it would be fair to say that the medicalization of children is part of a kind of larger cultural dysfunction that is rooted in how people may be operating on a very deep level. And I think, again, this speaks more to what demedicalization looks like, right? It means diverging from that. It means cultivating more wisdom, right? Getting more connected to our bodies, connected to ourselves, connected to our inner compass or our inner wisdom, however you think it's best to characterize that. It's about, not being controlling, and it's about caring about consent, both for ourselves and how we engage with others. Now, a final thought that I'd like to explore here is this question of almost like, what is the true nature of the kids that are more likely to be medicalized? Because I think there are patterns there, right? There are some kids that, really kind of fall into this trap where they get diagnosed with a lot of things, ADHD, whatever it is, right? And I think there are patterns there, because these are kids that are kind of bouncing off the walls in their environment. They're coming up against it. And often it's like kids that are not fitting into their family system are also not fitting into their school system, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like they're coming up against the dysfunction of the environment that I've been describing, right? The controlling nature of it, the lack of emotional depth, the lack of awareness, the fact that the people in charge don't value things like wisdom, you could say. And so I think this also speaks to the fact that there's a certain population of people that are getting marginalized, right? And this medicalization of mental health of kids is a big part of that marginalization. And that is a population of people that are, perhaps they're more sensitive, right? They have more awareness. They have, maybe they're like people that are particularly prone to being interested in, philosophy and spirituality, and maybe they're more creative, and maybe they're more like kind of anti-authoritarian, they're not as willing to just go along with things. And so I think that it speaks just to kind of the marginalization of these really important capabilities that we need to develop in our culture. And so I think demedicalization is a lot about rebalancing power and emphasis away from this ideology and toward the cultivation of these really important traits. So this is my take on the medicalization of children's mental health and what demedicalization might mean. So I really hope that this video has resonated for you. Please share this video with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Please also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end, and I look forward to having you for the next one.